Are you ready to dive deep into meaningful discussions, explore personal stories, and gain practical insights that can transform your approach to mental fitness? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Real Talk Mental Fitness Podcast, where open conversation and authentic connections come together to empower your mental well-being. I'm your host, Chinazom, and I'm so excited to have you here with us today. Okay, we are here, a new show. I'm very, very excited for this show. So my guest today, our paths seem to always cross whenever I'm in Nigeria. So whenever I seem to talk to him in Nigeria, usually sweating my ass off like I was last time. But the universe kind of reached out to me that I needed to connect with you for some reason. And I hope we're going to find out today what that reason is. But yeah, I'm very excited about this, and I can't wait for the world to learn more about you, Petra, and what you're passionate about and what you have in store for the future. So please, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me. You're right, we do cross paths over the years, right? Just at random times, and it's been great to observe, how your mission has grown and the things that you guys are doing. So I guess my mission is all around mental health at work. My background is actually youth mental health, so working with young people, with teenagers, and helping them kind of think about, well, what's the line between our normal human experience, which is really what mental health is, right? And mental illness, or when that kind of struggle comes in. I'm a psychotherapist by background. I run a mental health consultancy, so work with international organizations. And what I'm really interested in, you'll know this from my story, which I'm sure I'll get into, is how groupthink plays a part in organizational change. And, we talk about inclusion, we talk about diversity, we talk about these different buzzwords. And of course, they're coming from real kind of heart-centered places. But I'm not sure that we really tackle groupthink in organizations when it comes to what is mental fitness, what is a mentally healthy organization. So I could talk about these topics all day. I'm passionate about those themes, and I guess I write a lot as well. So have a book out and working on the next one.
Okay. Great. Well, great topic. And I'm really excited to get into this because we always focus on the individual. So what does mental fitness mean for the individual? And I love when you said that because we all live in groups, families, corporates, whatever you want to call it. I didn't realize there's always a group everywhere that you go. And one-on-one individually, we're completely different. You then put us into a group and it's like, what the hell happened? And that plays so much part on our mental health. Because I worked at a recent place where just watching the impact of culture had, it was just shocking to see. And I think that's something that we haven't tackled on our show. And I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into that.
Because I even think that we outsource mental health out of the business. So when people are struggling, we're like, go call this number, find this benefit on the internet, go outside. And there's this notion of like, sort yourself out and then come back and keep working or being productive or being part of a culture. But I'm like, well, what about the mental fitness within the environment? What about the safety that we need, the challenge? Like the thing I talk about is, that it's not about bubble bath well-being, right? Which is like self-care. Let's all light a candle. Yeah. I mean, do those things by all means. I have nothing against them. But my thing about mental fitness and mental health is having brave conversations, aligning with our values, saying how we feel, challenging norms. Like that's what I think really brings out that resilience in mental fitness in a group.
Yeah, I love that point about the bubble bath because I used to always think like well-being means you just relax and you take it easy. But the reality is all of us are performing at a high level. And it's usually when the pressure is on, then we actually see, do you really believe in well-being? Like, are you really going to allow me to go switch off so that I can come back and actually deliver? Or are you going to think, oh, because I went to take a rest, I'm not committed. And then the next minute, I know I get sacked for no reason. So it's like, what do you actually do when it's under pressure? And those norms really have to be, they can't just be like buzzwords. They're literally in the heat of the moment, like what actions are the leaders taking to actually make that come to life?
How do you evolve your workplaces for the future? And that's what all of this entails, right?
Yeah. Ijeoma,
I just, as I'm listening to you, it's so interesting. I hadn't really thought about it the way you said it, Petra, about how we kind of mentally outsource the aspect of our responsibility, our collective responsibility to support each other. It's like when you're thriving, it's amazing. Like we embrace you, we reward you, we celebrate you. And even when you're struggling to a certain degree, because we have this threshold, right? To a certain degree, we'll prop you up, we'll give you training, whatever the case may be, some leave days. But once you go below this sort of invisible line, or your scenario, your specific situation is outside of what we've kind of planned for, we send you out to go and get some help elsewhere. And how did you first become aware of that? And like, what are you learning? I haven't had that awareness raised.
So I'm smiling because I was born and raised in a religious cult. So I have a Dutch passport. I grew up in India, Brazil, Russia, Kenya, sort of all over the place in communes. And as you're describing the corporate way, right, which is if you're doing well, we take the credit. We're like, we're all thriving. It's amazing working here, right? And if you're struggling, it's like, there's something wrong with you. You need to sort yourself out, you know, and it just mirrors, and I talk about this on stage, it mirrors cult life, which is if we're winning, you know, we take the credit, you know, commune life is great. We're so, you know, anti-culture, you know, we're doing things in a different way. But when you have a doubt, or if you think you're burnt out, or something is going on physically or mentally for you, we need to pray for you. You know, there's something wrong with you. Like, go sort yourself out. Like, you're not part of you're doing something wrong. God is punishing you, that kind of vibe, right? And so while it sounds very different, you guys, you're nodding because I think you can see the themes, the threads of like hierarchy. And so my interest, I guess, in groupthink comes from that really personal place of needing to extricate myself from cult life in my early 20s, and that the impact of that actually came afterwards. So we think that when we're in the toxic world, that's when it's the tough time. Not really. You're in survival mode and you're putting one foot in front of the other, and it's underneath the surface that your physical health and your mental health are often crumbling or corroding slowly, right? And it's often when we leave, and we'll hear this from people who go on holiday and then they get sick, right? So it's like, yay, beach time, you know, it's time to go. And then you're like, fall flat on your face and you're like, I can't move, I can't even read a book, right? And that's not recovery time for performance, is it? That's like continuing the survival. Yeah. so I guess for me, my interest, to answer your question, EJ, was just kind of, how is this showing up in corporate life? Because when I left the cult, I stupidly thought this meant I was now free.
Right.
Right. I then realized that all you do is join other types of groups or organizations or concepts or belief systems that are there to kind of control us, right? And to put us in a fear state, which is you need me or you will not get your salary. You will then be homeless, not survive, not be able to support your family. And that's the, of course, extreme end of catastrophic thinking. But that's why people stay in roles where they're burnt out and they're overwhelmed. And it is when we do change that often our body falls apart for a little while. And so all that self-doubt of maybe I did need them, maybe I did need to work in this kind of toxic way, maybe it's the only way, right? And so for me, mentally healthy cultures are individual responsibility. Chinazom, to your point, like we need that individual responsibility, but we also need the collective or organizational, and we need both of those to create mentally healthy cultures.
So much.
I threw a lot at you. Just
that was so deep. I'm still processing it. Like,
whoa!
I'm going to try to process stream of consciousness. So that what I just took away, first of all, is this survival need that we have. And I was in the coaching call this week. I was doing some coaching training, and someone in the group did a stand-up, and she tried to show how she's just been joining cults. And she did it quite funnily. Like, I went to college, I found stand-up comedy, I joined that cult, and you know, the leaders basically took the piss out of the power structure. She went into a job advertising another cult, and she finally mentioned one of the people as being Rasputin, which was funny, but actually that's what happens in every single structure. People are going to rise to the top, and then they have all that power in their hand. Are they going to use it correctly? And I love what you said, because every time we go into corporate, I've kind of had my full of corporate now. Like just after 20 something years, I've realized they're all messed up. And it's that thing where our identity is like, this is who I am. I'm part of this, and I need this protection. And you're right. I never thought about it. Even when you leave, you keep thinking, are you sure you're doing the right thing? Are you sure you're going to survive on your own? And that's like, that to me has got to change in a group where you still need to be able to be yourself in that group. And there shouldn't be this fear pile dynamic of the reason why you should just want to be in that group because you feel safe and you feel included. And that's what's coming up for me at the moment.
It seems so simple, right? But like you said, once you leave, what are our cultures outside of work? It's our families, it's our education structures, our cultures, our nationalities, you know. And so then you just get other layers of, often the people that love you the most show that protective fear of like, are you sure? Like, oh, are you making the right decision, right? And I just had a conversation with somebody called Dr. Ardeshir Miran. He's coming onto my podcast about depression. He's a clinical psychologist, and thinking about depression and anxiety actually being data points. So information that you are not living your fullest version of your life.
I love that.
Right?
We were just having a conversation about how you need to, like, you spend so much of your life fighting these emotions. And for me, my biggest one was anger. Until I started to give room for the anger, and then I realized that anger was a message and really important information. Same as with depression and anxiety and all these things. When we're in cults, they're usually stamped out of us or beaten. You shouldn't play into that. And then that's what actually affects our, what I want to call our mental fitness, because we're not even listening from the signals that our own soul is sending us because of the cults.
Soul, our body, our environment, our nervous system, right? It's just, information is actually everywhere. But what we're doing in society is spending all our time numbing, avoiding, right? And we've got the perfect way to do it just in our hand the whole time. It's just like anything not to feel, right?
Absolutely. Well, but here's the thing that I'm, if I'm following correctly, because Chinazom, you mentioned your love-hate relationship with corporate. You can't seem to get away from corporate, can you? Because your clients are still in corporate.
The power source keeps dragging me back.
And you enjoy it though. But what I'm hearing you say, Petra, is that groupthink is potentially everywhere. Like the cult's mentality and structure and the mechanisms are almost everywhere. It can be in your family circle, it can be in your neighborhood, your community environment, it can be at the local, if you're a faith worshiper, wherever you go to worship, it's in the schools you go to, whatever type of work environment, corporate or not. It seems like we're saying wherever two or more people are gathered, there is a potential for groupthink to creep in. Am I hearing that properly?
There is. And those are the experiments that have been done on, if there's a group together and you have to make a choice, and that the thing is, there's a very famous one where there's a line, but two lines, they're the same size, but it looks a little bit kind of like they could be a different size. And basically everybody's part of the experiment except for one person, and that person's at the back of the line, right? And so 99% of these people say they're different, right? And it's obviously the wrong answer. It's so obvious in this experiment, right? And that last person will go up, and I can't remember what the ratio is because they've done this countless times. The highest percentage of people will just go along with what the group said, even though they're looking at this picture and going, that can't be right, right? It's so obvious. And they'll go along with it. So those are kind of some of the experiments in social psychology, right? But interesting, it doesn't necessarily mean the environment's toxic for there to be groupthink, right? And we, in my business, so I'm a small business, case study of, a couple people, we're about 5 people. And we recently had an experience of groupthink in our business. And I think the difference was we called it out and we put it as a top point in our team meeting agenda to discuss it, to reflect on it, and to call it out and kind of understand where people were coming from. And we realized that, and it was kind of going with a product that, we didn't quite believe in, but everyone was saying yes to. So we got as far as like, what's our launch date and what's all the resource that we're going to put into it and all these things. And then it was right at the edge. And I said, something doesn't feel right, And it was when I asked people one-on-one, I said, something doesn't feel right. What do you think? Everyone said, me too, something doesn't feel right. These are my reasons. One-on-one, right? Small group. And I thought this troubled me greatly because I thought I was immune, right? I was like, surely my team will not be doing this. And so it really troubled me. So we put it on our team meeting agenda for a couple days later and really had an open conversation. And people were being protective of each other. They were like, I didn't want to hurt that person's feelings whose idea it was. I didn't want to, I could be wrong. I might feel stupid, right? And so people were saying, I feel really psychologically safe, and we always say things, but for some reason. So I think the difference is calling it out, using space to reflect on what happened, how can we do better? And we've now got a couple kind of checkpoints for ourselves in order to prevent this from happening again. So just a little example, but it's like, it's not if it happens that it means you're toxic or that it's bad. It's, do we notice it? Do we call it out at some point? And how do we reflect and do something with it? Does that make sense? Just like that little micro example.
I love that, because those are like, it seems like the underlying drivers of the groupthink that showed up were actually positive. It's like, trusting in what we can create as a collective, like support from my fellow team member, like collaboration and alignment. Like these are all like positive traits that you would want to show up if you're trying to work together as a collective to make something important happen. But a byproduct of it could be groupthink.
Yeah, which prevents innovation and people feeling aligned and engaged with their purpose personally and for the business, is like if it carries on, right? So again, it's not that groupthink is the problem, but it is the awareness of it. And I see it in all these networks in organizations as well. Chinazom, I wonder what you think, having been in corporate in that way. So we've got a network for everything, right? Everyone's got a space to belong. And I love the sense of belonging when done right. However, I noticed that in many places, those different networks are not talking to each other. So we're all on the same side, trying to create inclusive and mentally healthy cultures. And yet we're in our pockets of belonging, but not actually communicating in a way that will enable the entire culture to be inclusive and mentally healthy. I don't know, Chinazom, does that make sense? Like the silo effect, I think I would call it.
And as you just said that, for me, it's always diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially living in the UK and the US. It's such a big issue here in the US. And the thing that blows me away is how everybody stays in their groups.
Right.
And there's like, but we want diversity, but it's like, but you don't talk.
We want it separately.
You don't know each other. You don't have there's no space. Like once anything that could be racial in the US, oh my God, nobody wants it. We just kind of like dance around it because nobody just wants to create that space where like, let's talk about it. And I'm not saying the UK has its own issues, but one thing I do find is it's quite hard when you all go to school together, you've all spent time with each other. It's easier for you to then voice it than it is over here. And that's one thing that just came to me, in that you've got to make that space for the groups to be talking. Otherwise, it just never comes out into the open.
Talking and listening. So how do we effectively listen when we're in survival mode? How do we really hear? And how does that translate into action? And I don't necessarily mean we need to, action for me is like, it's how I think, that's an action. It's how I show up and invest in myself, and it's how I connect with others. Like that, those are actions. And then of course there's the bigger like activism type actions, right? But I think we sometimes focus on the big activism and forget that activism starts from within, right? It's like the little, how do I listen? How do I take responsibility to admit I'm wrong, or to ask a question if I'm, that's vulnerable and that's open to learning, right? And if everyone's in like, I'm so busy. What's the classic thing these days? How are you? Busy. That's just like the class. It's not even fine anymore. I'm busy.
But something you just said really resonated for me is when we're in survival mode.
Yeah.
Because I think that's, to me, that's just like, everybody will sit here and come up with all these theories about well-being and inclusion. But once you get into corporate, and it's like, you've got to beat the competition by any means necessary, which means survival mode. And then that's where all of a sudden, it's like whatever you said or whatever you write down as your principles, that goes out the window. And I really want to like, how can we bring that when people are in survival mode to like, you've got to show up like that in survival mode. You've got to, if you're going to beat the competition, but you've got to stick to what you said in survival mode.
I don't think performance necessarily means being in survival mode, like high performance, right? I think that is what's happening, and that has to do with a post-COVID world with fear about war and information, and these days you get your notifications just pinging at you the whole time. Whereas in the past, perhaps you had to worry about your city, your village, your town, like your school, like whatever that would be, and now we're like, war or unrest everywhere is like hitting our nervous system, not to mention the dopamine hits of just social media and the fast pace of things. So I do think the best high performance, if we think of athletes, and you guys are experts in this, they have active recovery, they have time for, muscle repair, they think about nutrition, they're thinking about the whole piece, right? In order to then, boom, perform at the race or whatever the thing is that they're doing. So the antidote in my mind is spaces for reflection, right? So it's kind of saying, let's all, like whoever the team is, let's all take a breath together and just really ask ourselves, are these the right priorities? Because busy is not necessarily performing. How much inefficiency is there in meeting culture if we just take one thing? Meeting culture.
Yeah.
That's not performance.
You're really going to
a whole TED talk there about meeting culture.
And since coming from the US, is like everyone's always busy with the big vat of coffee.
Yeah. And medication.
If I could follow you and track your output, you're just creating a mess. Like you tapered off at 10 o'clock. That was your last bit of performance. But now we're like 6 p.m. You've been drinking so much coffee and you're not performing. You're just leaving a wreck.
Existing is what you're doing. Yeah.
So let me just draw the lines just for our listeners for a second. So we talked about having conversations across groups as well as within the group, actively listening, right? Not just speaking, but listening. And then you talked about sort of to create an environment where you can actively listen. That antidote is given space to reflect. Mm-hmm. Is that where so this is really interesting because this is something Chinazom and I have talked about because we're both coaches, right? Sure. And one thing that comes up, we were just talking about this on Sunday, is reflecting is a muscle. Like not everyone knows how to do it. Not everyone is willing to do it or able to do it. Have you come across that in your work, and what are you learning as a result of that?
I mean, so reflection, you could have a tactic around, like a tip or a tool, but the underlying element is self-awareness, right? And being able to look within and take accountability for your part and understand other people's part, right? So, there's formal and informal. So there's formal, which is like, let's do a reflective practice and review where we're at and what do we want, and let's create a little bit of space for this, right? But I recently went to an event which was technically reflective practice for the aim of contributing to a white paper, and the 5 white men that had the loudest voices took up all the space. Like that's no longer reflective or inclusive, is it? It's just noise, right? So it's an art, not a science, is how I see it. It's like to model the behavior as the leader, right? To say, to regulate breathing, to actually model that we're allowed to have space, to not have something immediately after in your calendar, for example, right? Things like that. Those are the tactics. But then it takes vulnerability. And it's lifelong, as you guys know, as coaches. Like self-awareness is not just one and done. Like I just learned something about my team and about me and my blind spots a couple weeks ago, right? That I thought I'd covered, and then I was like, whoa, like let me just reflect on this. And I came to my team in that space going, I'm really reflecting because it was my blind spot. It was on me. How can we learn, right? So I also have reflective, I wouldn't call it a reflective practice. It could be journaling, it could be meditation, it could be walking without headphones or anything in, just so that you can kind of do that contemplation thing. That's what I think we're missing a lot of, both at work, but then personally as well.
I always go to like mind wandering, like where you just have white space. And it's something that people, like whenever I try to bring it in my coaching practice, people get so guilty, like, where am I going to get the time to do that? But it's amazing when you let the mind wander, and I don't know, you tap into this place, gives you so much knowledge and awareness. But when we're just busy rushing around, I'm like, you're never really going to get into that place to get that self-awareness.
But even in coaching, do you find that clients are like goal setting? It's very like, all right, what's my next goal or my achievement or my thing? Like that's the mindset. It's like, keep me accountable for my goal. And I'm like, the goals will show up, right? But like, let's take a couple steps back first. I don't know what if you guys notice that.
Oh yeah, all the time. Oh, sorry, Jay, you go.
No, go ahead.
All the time. It's funny when people finally work out that all I'm doing is getting you to reflect on what you're doing, and then they're just like, and then when they start coming up with the answers, it's like there wasn't any magic. Like I literally just started asking you questions so that you can go below the surface and actually just stop and think, what the hell am I doing? Like, what do I want to? But every time people are so busy, like, okay, what next? I want to solve this. And it's like just slow down for a minute and just to let yourself just actually come to like present. Like, yeah, what are you doing? What do you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, this is an especially tough one, because I think one thing I'm starting to realize is just how interdependent so much of our lives are, the aspects of our lives. Like, on the one hand, I thought about where we started this conversation about the individual, because you mentioned there's the individual's personal responsibility, and then there's that larger kind of environmental system, part to play. And I think of the individual, and I think of mental fitness, and I think of those of us that are striving to have some space where we can mind wander or think or reflect, and putting some of these habits in place. And then I think of how we then show up at work, and you start off with the best of intentions, and then the day just kind of spirals from there. And so I layered on top of that what you just shared, Petra, about being intentional about creating space for some of that within the work context, where you say, hey, we're gonna have some reflection time, and don't put something right after in your calendar, etc. And that became interesting to me, because I started to see, well, those who are interested in it, who do it already in their personal lives, and then feel that they get derailed at work, can then have a way to continue and extend the impact of that and bring that into their workplace, which then changes how they show up in the other groups that they're in across the organization and other parts of their lives. So it's just kind of like, I think I just had that light bulb moment of just seeing how interconnected it all is. And I think we kind of ring fence work. We like put it in this container, and it's a box. It's like, I don't have any control over that. So you know what, it is what it is. And like, we're doing this thing where we're like, some of us are living in different ways. And then we come in and we're like, it's going to be a shit show, but I'm just going to bear through it. And then we leave. But what would it look like if we could reimagine that and start to see some blend? And that's what I'm interested in hearing more about from you, Petra.
The thing that you made me think about is like, okay, what does happen when we go into work? So we have the best intentions, like you said, and maybe we do have a journaling practice or some kind of mind wandering. Maybe we walk part of the way to the office or something like that. And then those best intentions go out of the window, or we inadvertently become part of groupthink, right? We just go, oh yeah, let's go ahead with that idea, without really thinking, is it the best idea? How's it going to work? These sorts of things. So the other piece is knowing your story and knowing your triggers, right? And that plays out in the workplace all the time, right? So how I feel about authority, right? How I feel in a group setting, it triggers, what I was like in a sibling group, perhaps, or in a school setting, right? So I know I'm a therapist, and people are like, should we be in therapy forever? No, but I do think it's important to tell your story once to a witness, and a witness that is objective, non-judgmental, and supportive. That could be a therapist, it could be a coach, it could be a trusted friend or a partner. That's not the point. But knowing our story allows us to connect those dots and go, oh, I am a product of my past. We all are. And so when we're kind of mindless and not kind of looking at that, those patterns just repeat. And hey, some of these startups were like, we're a family, right? I'm like, you probably are a pretty toxic one, right? So it's kind of, so I'll tell my team, like, I'll be like, oh, something kind of triggered me. And so I don't think I'm my best self right now. I want you guys to call me out on it. Like, what's going on for you? So that modeling of behavior as a leader to those things as well. Because like you said, work is not just like a little container. we bring ourselves into it. And I'm not a proponent of like, everyone must bring their whole selves to work all the time, because no, we need emotion regulation. We're adults. We have a job to do. There's a version of ourselves that we bring to work, but it can still be authentic. And that's what reduces depression, anxiety, disengagement, burnout, these sorts of things.
I love that. I love that so much. Chinazom, I want to hear from you. Like what's coming to you hearing Petra say this?
What's coming to me? I'm still trying to digest. Let me digest a bit. There's been too much.
I'll let you digest. I mean, there's one thing that came up just when you said that distinction of, because let's be honest, there's on the other end of the spectrum, like, so you've got like the mental health crisis, and you talked about it in one of your talks where you were like, it's also okay to just be okay, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't always have to be like spiraling survival, like, oh my God, doomsday. Maybe you're okay in this moment in your life, in this chapter today, this minute, and, you know, claim that, you know, own that and be content with that. But I thought of the other end where there's that propaganda around bring your whole self to work. And I bought into that hard, you know, because I'm generally very positive minded. I'm big on team leadership, leading by example. And to me, good was everyone on my team can bring their full selves to work. And I remember, you know, I was in a situation where I was running a team of 30 and I had 4 different generations on my team, you know, from like baby boomers all the way down to like Gen Z. And I just remember one day realizing like this definition of bring, you know, your full self to work, it doesn't mean the same thing or anything for some members of my team, you know. And I remember just realizing, just by virtue of me being such a strong believer in that, you know, it's almost as if I was creating this momentum, and I, you know, everyone buying into that meant we're a great team. We've got great collaboration, you know, we're strong performers, we've got each other's backs. And later on, I was having a conversation with a close friend of mine, and she had just lost her son. And she was telling me that she had started a new job shortly after, and no one on her new team, which she had been working on now for over a year, knew she even had kids, because she has 2 other kids. She never talks about her children because she doesn't want to get triggered about the son that she lost. And so they just think she just doesn't have kids. And she's really passionate about her job, very supportive, but they don't know anything about that part of her life. But that allows her to bring her best self to work. And so like, it was really the first time that I started to kind of revisit and kind of question like some of those things that I kind of adopted so fully with so much conviction because of the best of intentions. But in reality, is there such a thing as something that can apply to everyone? I know that was just something that came up to me while you were speaking.
And go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just going to reflect on the kind of extroverts, introverts, and how we communicate who we are is going to be different. And so creating spaces where someone can communicate who they are differently, right? Personally, I actually agree. I agree with this, the experience of this woman, but I also find that sad. Like I find like, what a shame that she couldn't in a safe space, and possibly not in that space, kind of say, hey, this is my experience, and what would be useful is if I can't handle being asked about, you know, the child that I lost, or the way you guys can support me is, you know, like we could be educating each other, but then she could not have this little secret of like, I can't say these things when someone says, what are you doing for spring break? Or, you know, so, and I can celebrate the kids that I do have. I don't know. So there's some nuance there that I would hope would be different. But I take your point that everyone's different. Just because I talk about like, you know, my PTSD or my triggers or my thing, I'm almost exaggerating a little bit so other people can come halfway, or can come like their version of a step in that direction. Or they might never do it, but they know that if they wanted to, they could. You know what I mean? So there's so much nuance here. I agree with you.
I think I finally processed now. So I don't. Well, to so much, you guys were just sharing so much. I was trying to make sure I let it all simmer and come out correctly. I just did a coaching training for 6 days last week, which kind of changed my life. And the last session was run by 2 women of color, And they just created this environment I've never ever experienced before. And there were people from so many different races, and it was just like, I finally, for the first time, we all got to see the human beings. There was 20 something of us. And I was like, this is so magical. And I remember at the end thinking, because I always find like when I coach, there's a coach environment. And then when I went to work in this startup, I kind of realized I couldn't bring the coaching environment into it because not everybody, as you said, not everybody's in the same level of being open and vulnerable as I am. But then I thought, this should be the real world. And that's what I actually said. I said, this should be the real world. Like, we have all these wars and everything going on. But actually, if we all got to see each other like we did in that space, there would not be all that suffering outside. And when I think, I was a firm believer of bring your whole self to work, until my last experience where I was like, you can't bring your whole self to work. I'm like what you said, Petra, you can bring your whole self, but to a certain degree of emotional regulation and everything else. But what now finally started hitting me is bring your whole self, but you need to also make sure you're creating psychological safety for everyone else. So somehow, and it's not that you're constraining yourself or whatever, but you have to also think about the collective. So make sure you're trying to bring your whole self. But so there has to be a dialogue of like, does it make everybody feel psychological safe? Because like what you said, you could be okay with talking about PTSD and everything else, but with other people where, you know, they had a whole different upbringing, which was everything was more straight and narrow, that could literally really trigger them. So it's like, that's that fine thing of how do we find that balance in the workplace where everybody can feel psychological safety.
I had an interesting conversation with a man of Nigerian heritage about and who has a son. So he's a male and a male, right? Nigerian guy. And he said, what do I want for my son? And, you know, he wants him to be strong, like all these kind of masculine traits, right? Yeah. And so I asked my friend, I was like, when's the last time you cried? Right? Nigerian man, right? And he went never or something. And then he said when he lost someone close to him. So it was like a valid reason in his mind to be emotional or show emotion. And so my narrative was like, men need to cry and it's important for men to cry and all these sorts of things, right? And then as we went deeper into the conversation, I kind of realized like, oh, you're a Black man in the UK and you have come from a particular culture and you are kind of raising your son in a particular way. And your reasons are so he doesn't join gangs and that he has a good start in life. Your whole lens is you probably couldn't cry in certain situations. It would not have been safe and it would have been a terrible idea. So who am I to put a lens that like challenging toxic masculinity means that you should cry or teach your son to cry because of your lens? Does that make sense? And so like we can always learn, right? Yeah. So what comes up for you?
Just well, because you know in my book I always talk about men don't cry and how men should cry. But what you just said was something that just happened recently. I just went to bury my dad, and I've got 3 brothers. And I remember all of us, again, when we're actually having to put our father into the ground, some little trouble was about to kick off with the church people wanting to take charge. And I turned around to my brother and I could see that he was crying, but not cry. You couldn't cry outside. You couldn't cry on the outside. So I remember feeling it wasn't safe to show your emotion in that place. And for me, I had to Ija actually asked me at the end, did you process your emotion? And I had to wait for everybody to go to be able to go into this space to then cry. And even when I was crying, I noticed that I wasn't crying loudly. And I was like, I wasn't judging myself, but I was like, that was very interesting. I didn't cry loudly. I made sure nobody else was around. And it's true what you said, growing up in Nigeria as a man, probably from the age of 12, I realized it wasn't safe to cry. Like it was not safe to cry in any space that I was in. And I didn't realize how ingrained that is, that now I can probably cry in front of my wife or people. I definitely try to cry in front of my son, but just hearing you now is like, I now have a different vantage point because it wasn't probably safe to cry when I was burying my dad because there was still so many things. Like even when I came out, immediately some group of people coming me and asking me for money for this, to this, and I had to automatically put the face on. Is like, don't start talking to me, don't start talking. So I realized this, yeah, sometimes with men, you have to think about the cultural backdrop is it actually safe for you to show those emotions? And I know we want it to be different, but yeah, that's what's coming up for me now is just hearing you say that just actually made me realize that sometimes it's not safe for you to do that.
And what's what's striking is that that's a valid place in theory to cry, right? The death of a loved one, right? Is to show that emotion, and that even in that place, it felt like you had to be strong or show up in a particular way and observe like silent tears or hidden tears, or and I guess my question, because you guys are married, is how can we as women, wives, girlfriends, sisters, so what is the right approach? Like, how can we support our men to show emotion? Because I've seen in my previous relationships, be vulnerable. I want to see that part of you, that sort of thing. And then what happens? A man shows vulnerability and a woman gets scared, right? And a man can micro, like he assesses it from a micro level of like, she just flinched a little bit, even if maybe she said something, right? Like we read a thing. And so I think the conversation starts with how can, and I'm saying women, but it's like, how can other men as well, but how can we support our men to feel safe enough to evolve, the ability to show emotion? I don't know if that question makes sense, but
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Let IJ,
I mean,
the best person to answer this, because how did you manage to make me feel safe to cry?
you know what? This is a very interesting question, because I mean, the reaction you shared about the person who's trying to provide support, then feels afraid. I've also even seen some people respond with disgust, which they didn't even know would be their response, and then being shocked at that new information that they received about themselves.
Yeah.
And the other person perceiving it being equally shocked. And in that moment, everything gets derailed, right? The intention was this, and now you're in a very different place. So it is so interesting to me. And I think for me, this is work in progress, Petra, this is a lifelong journey. But I think of the opposite of my partner drowning inside with so much loneliness, so much fear, so much anger, so much guilt, you name it, right? Whatever it is, that it's that driving emotional state, and just feeling like they cannot surmount that. And that to me is the worst possible outcome. So anything I can do to not enable that is what I focus on. I just want whatever it is that you are facing or thinking, however bad it might be, I need you to feel that you can show up like that. You can bring that version or that thing into our relationship. Because if you don't feel that, then it doesn't matter what you say, you don't have trust. You don't feel safe, right? And then that then creates an energy that then informs how you navigate that relationship with me. So that's what I'm always thinking of, is like, I just don't want you to suffer in silence and by yourself.
Which is dangerous.
I rather see it, even if it's messy, than not see it if that's your reality in that moment, But then you have to also keep that in the back of your mind, because that's your intention, but also recognize, like, you can't force it either.
It's timing. And we can have the intention of psychological safety, but psychological safety is a felt experience, right? So it's like, how does the other person experience that intention? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So Chinazom, what can women? I mean, obviously you're doing it, and you guys are working through it, and there's all these ways, right? But I'm curious in a broader sense. Yeah.
And I think what EJ just said, I want to also say it's a work in progress. Like, it's not an easy thing, because if I'm now playing it in my head, it's been like 8 years of one thing I think for me is like, EJ always shows her emotion, like probably so much so it was always so jarring for me that you can be having a conversation, the next minute she's crying, and I'm like, what the?
I'm leading by example.
But we had a lot of challenges early on, so we had to I had to see the emotion, and then that kind of showed a mirror for me, because I would always have to go on a walk, and then I would have to sit there with emotion, and she couldn't take it, that she couldn't see this emotion. So it used to really upset me. She's like, how do you feel? How do you feel? We got to, and she just wore me down in the end. By then, she wore me down.
8 years later.
Yeah, because I was like, you have to share this emotion. And then she kind of just gave me the space to process it, to process the raw. So this is still quite a hot topic for us, is anger. So anger, I was never allowed to show anger. I had two sisters, so if I got angry, I had to, you know, shove it down, and they could get angry and say anything that they wanted. So I realized that was one of the emotions that I wasn't allowing, I wasn't giving space to. So I had to tell EJ in the beginning that this is new for me. So when we're having these discussions, I'm going to shout. I'm going to, because as a man, that's just that I haven't. It's like I'm a toddler. I've not been allowed to express that. So in the beginning, even though it'd scare her, I think she knew that I would always have her best intention. So she gave me that freedom. And then after 8 years, I started to get okay with living with that emotion. And then from there, that allowed me to be able to express and feel a lot of other emotions. And I think it's just when you go through experiences, I kind of now know how much she has my back. So it's like,
you built trust over time.
Yes, you can say trust, but she's built it over time by so many things that she's done, so that I now feel like this is my safe space. Like whatever I can show up, whatever state I am in.
I think that point is a good point around the communication and the context, right? Because, for example, he had to explain to me, this is my relationship with crying. This is my relationship with anger, right? Like if he did not share that context, I wouldn't have the information I needed to understand and to respond in a way that would be helpful towards our joint goals, right? So I think that's also that is the person's responsibility, and they're on their own journey. Like, when do I feel comfortable enough to share, and how do I share, and how much of it do I share? You know, because if you overshare, you then feel overly exposed because you haven't created enough trust in that environment to hold that level of your secret self and bring it out to the table like that. So it's an iterative thing. It's incremental and it's mutual. Both sides are doing it with a lot of context setting as you're doing it. So it's like, this is what this means for me. So now, 8 years later, I know that, wow, him actually expressing some anger or disappointment is so positive because it means he's actually sharing how it feels, right? As opposed to when I first came into the relationship where it's like, argument is just dialogue. Like there's no emotion attached to it. It's just like we're expressing different views, we're exploring, we're investigating. Where is this energy coming from? You know, so it really takes that stage by stage context setting and sharing and dialoguing in real life to actually get there.
So I love that because that's definitely my experience as well. And I think what many relationships forget to do, and I mean work relationships, parent relationships, and sort of romantic relationships, is it's not such a big deal like what happens, obviously with caveats around violence or anything like that. But I just mean like the normal kind of emotional responses. Like we trigger each other, we hold up a mirror, you know, we're protective, we love, you know, we're bringing all this stuff, right? And so for some people, it might be explosive. It might be like, you know, shut down a little bit. But for me, it's all about what happens next. So like, what is the repair? What is the conversation that happens in peacetime when the emotion is like simmered and we're all like recovered a little bit? Like you're not going to repair or solve everything in those moments, right? But many people, it freaks them out, shut down. Let's never talk about that again until it sort of pops up again like a volcano, right? Whereas I've just found like circling back to it and going, I'm really curious what happened then, what was going on for you, or it made me feel like this. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I want to say both of us are pretty good at circling back. I'm more of a person about timing because I'm like, if we're emotionally charged, whether I kind of call it, you have your chimp. Everybody has their chimp. The animals. Yeah. There's like, if the chimp is taken over, this is not the time to circle back. So let the chimp process it, and then we circle back and we're like, okay, how can we, what can we learn and how can we move forward?
I do like the point you're making, Petra, about when emotions, like unplanned emotions, expressive emotions show up, negative emotions show up in the workplace. It's interesting because I experienced, you know, I work with teams as well. And I experienced in a team environment where a conversation that maybe should have been more private was overheard by the rest of the team, right? They're in a cubicle, but it's not a soundproof cubicle, right? And we're hearing this person get worked up, get emotional. We're hearing a little bit of crying. We're hearing a little bit of raised voices. And then we're seeing the other person just sitting there, just like numb, like it's that shutdown, like fight, flight, freeze, like they've frozen. They don't even know what to do with it. And the rest of the team just in a state of confusion, not understanding what's going on, not knowing necessarily what to say, people being triggered by that and responding in different ways. Some were not bothered, some were very bothered by it. But the part that I find most consistent is the point that you raised about you've got to address it, even if it's at a later point. So many teams will then say, well, that never happened. Like, we're going to just do a little bit of like Men in Black, like, like erase your memory. It never happened. And then try and go back to engaging as if. And it doesn't work because that just sits in the middle of the relationship of the team forevermore.
Yeah. And we think that we're either building trust or it's staying static, but we're actually eroding trust in those
That's
moments.
right.
It's like you go down, right? You go backwards. And I think this is the biggest fear people have in teams and in that repair place. You don't have to have the solution. You don't have to have the 3-step plan that you can Instagram about, right? It's naming the emotion. So it's naming the thing. So it's like, I kind of noticed that there was a lot of anger, or many of us might be making up stories off the back of this event. Like, I think it might be useful to reflect, like, what came up for me was, like, what else is in the room, that kind of stuff, that kind of group coaching ability, which I think any leader should have the ability to do. Because the brave thing is naming what they've seen.
I was just going to jump in, but the problem is so many leaders don't have the tools, or they don't want to go anywhere near that. Like, oh my God, emotion, like, and that's what
again.
Yeah, what they would rather have is the Men in Black thing and just go, look here.
Oh, if we could sell that en masse, we would make so much money. That would be such a prized possession.
Never happened. Keep working. Keep going.
Collective amnesia. I mean, and just on that point around why some leaders may not feel able to have that kind of conversation, even if they saw the value of it, part of it is also just maybe not having had that type of training, right? They don't know how to have it. Part of it could also be they feeling triggered themselves by what they experienced or observed and not really know how to process their own emotion, right? And not fully trusting themselves to be able to have that kind of conversation. And then the third one is, and I hate to introduce it, but it comes up in the workplace environment, legal ramifications, harassment, this, that. There's like a slew of things from a workplace perspective. And if you're not educated on that, or you don't have the right resourcing, embedded in your organization as a leader, you can feel very afraid to even try to have those kinds of conversations because you don't know what the implications will be.
Chinazom, have you noticed a difference in the UK and the US just around the legal fears, that third point?
Well, I love Ija just brought that because I never even thought about the legal, but the moment legal and HR get involved, the humanness just walks out the room, and then it becomes this weird thing. And I think in America, the HR legal thing is a lot more intense. It's
so intense. Yeah, but the fear is the same. So the fear is, and I name a couple of fears here. The fear is I won't know what to do with the information. If somebody says, if I ask and then they're like, blah, 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 and they're like, ooh, I won't be able to fix it. Everyone's going to take time off and nobody's going to do the work. And people forget that you're only taking time off when it's really, really crisis, right? That's actually, the prevention is like, if we talk about it, then we can diffuse the bomb a little bit and not have to take time off, right? Work could be a protective factor for people. But it's that thing of, I won't know how to fix it. I won't know what to say. What will I do with this information? Or everyone's just going to be, crying and singing Kumbaya the whole time. Who's going to do the work, right? So it's like challenging the fears, the misconceptions around it, and saying that you don't, and you guys know this, you don't have to have a solution or to know everything about the thing in order to name it and create that space. But that fear is real, and that fear has gotten worse in a post-COVID kind of world where everyone's like, oh, what if I get restructured out? What if I this? Let me just keep my head down and be quiet. And funny that depression, anxiety, and burnout are through the roof. There's a correlation. You know what I mean?
This conversation has been amazing, and I
So good.
feel like we could do it for another hour. It's a good thing that we're coming on your show, so I'd like
Wait, I can't wait.
carry on from here, because the fear is debilitating, and it seems to just be getting worse. Like since last year, I was like, okay, it's going to start calming down, and it's not calming down. It's getting worse, and I just hope that, like you said, I think we have to name the fear, or we need to like let it in so that we can actually see what is causing it and talk to the fear and ask it, why are you so rampant at the moment now, and what lesson do we need to learn?
There's a strangely hopeful bit, though, just for a final thought.
Thank you. I was going to say, let's end it off on something to celebrate.
We're fucked. Sorry. The hopeful bits to me are, one, the amount of people leaving the corporate workplace and innovating and doing other things and like choosing themselves. So I think that's beautiful. And the second thing is the workplace needs to evolve drastically. We're still holding a hangover from like the industrial kind of past, and, you know, sit at your seats, you know, you're working based on 9 to 5, but rather than output. With AI, with all this disruptive stuff, like the world is changing. And unfortunately, people hold on as long as they possibly can to the old ways before the new ways actually sort of come in. And so for me, it's got to get this bad as Gen Z come up and the next generations come up, and the boardroom dies off and everything changes, for the world of work to change, for us to be judged on output, not just on time, for us to really radically rethink things. So, you know, you got to get through the darkness in order to get through the next bit of light. So I'm kind of strangely excited about that.
Okay, so there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
There's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. I love that.
We're creating light all the time right now.
What's that? The darkest hour of the night comes before the light comes. So I think we're just at that bit, and the light is here. That's why we're having all that shake up.
That's it. I agree.
Yeah. Oh, Petra, I can't thank you enough for this. This conversation was just amazing, and we can't wait to do it on your show. So
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's play the outro. And that brings us to the end of another insightful episode of Real Talk. We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion and have gained valuable insights into enhancing your mental well-being and productivity. Now, before we wrap things up, we have an exciting opportunity for you. Are you curious about your mental fitness score? Want to know how you can improve your overall well-being and boost your productivity? Well, we have just the thing for you. Head over to our show notes, where you will find a link to our exclusive mental fitness quiz. It's a quick and easy assessment that will provide you with a personalized score and actionable steps to enhance your general well-being and productivity. It's like having a personal coach in your pocket. And don't forget to subscribe to Real Talk on your favorite podcast platform. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when we release new episodes filled with valuable discussions, expert interviews, and practical tips for leading a fulfilling life. You can also connect with me, Chinazom, on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for daily inspirations, updates on upcoming episodes, and behind-the-scenes peeks into the Real Talk community. Remember, your mental well-being matters, and taking small steps towards improvement can make a significant difference in your life. We're here to support you on your journey. Thank you for tuning in today, and a special thank you to all our listeners who have joined us on this incredible podcasting adventure. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep striving for a better version of yourself. Take care and stay mentally fit.